So before we begin chapter 2 of Who Am I, let's just review real quick chapter 1. We talked about the term emotional chastity, what emotions are, what chastity is. We talked about self-possession, kind of as a fundamental building block. We talked about the history of the feelings revolution, which began with Sigmund Freud last century and really had a fundamental effect on how we see emotions in a positive or negative light. And I think that was a very important aspect to begin with as we enter into this reflection on reclaiming love. Chapter 2 is about who am I? Fundamentally, what is the human person? Who am I? What makes up who I am? So let's just go through some of the aspects of what makes up the human person, just very briefly, to introduce this discussion in this chapter. Human dignity, let's begin with that. Human dignity is so central to the teachings of John Paul II, that the human person is made in the image and likeness of God and has a uniqueness, a unrepeatability. Man is not merely animal. Yes, he has clearly an animal sensitive side to him. He is bodily, he's material, right? He has those characteristics, but he's also spiritual. He has a soul. So man is body and soul. He's a unity that makes up fundamentally our human dignity. Our higher purpose as human beings is love. We were created to love. We have this fundamental innate calling to give ourselves to another person, right? This is what makes us fulfilled and happy, is in love. We image God, whose relationship, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and therefore relationship is so critical for our own happiness because God made us relational beings. What about human reason? Human reason really is what separates us, you could say, from the animal world. We can know truth, right? We have two, we could call it two mental power sources. We have the logical side, the discursive side of A, B, C, and D equals E, right? So important to our human reasoning, but we also have the intuitive side. Both the intuitive and the logical make up our human reason and are fundamental to what we are as human beings. What about the will, our capacity to choose, our ability to choose freely? Will is a motor, right? It moves us to choose the good. That's what will is. It's fundamentally a motor, easy to remember. How does reason and will actually work together? I kind of liken it to this analogy, right? You have reason sees, right? It has the light to see, but it has no motor to move towards what it sees. Where will has a motor, but it doesn't see. So reason and will need each other fundamentally. One to see, the other to move towards what that truth and goodness is so that people can choose it freely. What about freedom? Freedom is so important and so central to this whole discussion because you can't love if you're not free. You have to be free in order to love. We must understand the role of freedom in love so we don't abuse it. We give particular importance to this subject in your discussions as you gather together because it's so fundamental to understanding the nature of love in our human experience. Conscience comes next. That inner voice in us, inner voice of God that calls us. It's a calling to do the good and to avoid evil. The conscience sees the good and urges us towards it, but it doesn't choose it. We need to choose it. Conscience does not choose it for us. What about morality? What about being moral beings? To be human is to be a moral being. And a moral person, in a very simple way, you can define as someone who exhibits goodness in their actions. That's a moral being. We end our discussion or summary with just a comment or two on human sexuality, because our human sexuality is so important because it reflects our identity. It communicates a great mystery. That's what human sexuality does. It communicates an awesome mystery. This is so central to the teachings of John Paul II, particularly in his theology of the body, that the invisible mystery of God's love becomes visible in the very design of male and female, in the gift of self, of the man and woman together in that totality of gift of self, one giving, one receiving. That is an image of God himself in the inner life of God as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and that mystery of the interpersonal relationship that God is. We image that literally in our human relationships, particularly in that one beautiful gift of human sexuality, the act of giving yourself to the other. I will highlight as we close here that not just freedom, but also human sexuality. I would just encourage you to spend maybe a little bit more time on those two themes, primarily because they're so fundamental to understanding who I am as a person, who we are as human beings. So I wish you all the best in this discussion. I'm sure it's going to be very stimulating. Thanks.